Well, new this morning, some CBS News employees are threatening to quit amid fears of corporate censorship.
Weiss told show leadership to pull the segment late Saturday, in part because there was no interview with the Trump administration, according to a source at the network.
On Sunday night, CBS pulled an investigative report by 60 Minutes just hours before its scheduled broadcast. The segment had already been publicly promoted and formally placed on the program lineup. Under the original plan, the report focused on cases in which people were deported by the U.S. government not back to their home countries, but to El Salvador, where they were transferred to a maximum security prison. The investigation documented serious allegations regarding detention conditions and the treatment of deportees. The decision to pull the segment came as Donald Trump was publicly attacking 60 Minutes and applying pressure on CBS, while the network's parent company was awaiting critical regulatory approvals from the federal government. CBS said the report would air at a later date. However, the last-minute removal immediately sparked major controversy over editorial independence and the role of political pressure in American media. In the weeks leading up to the decision, Donald Trump had repeatedly targeted 60 Minutes, not once, not impulsively, but through a sustained and systematic series of statements, demanding apologies, accusing the program of bias, and hinting at punishment. Trump directly attacked CBS, its new leadership, and the reporting he labeled as hostile. At the same time, CBS's parent company, Paramount, found itself in a highly sensitive position. Major deals, expansion plans, strategic decisions, all requiring approval from federal regulators, especially the Federal Communications Commission. In that context, angering the president was no longer just a media risk. It became a business risk. And when business risk intersects with journalism, what emerges is not overt censorship, but self-censorship. The decision to pull the report immediately sent shockwaves through CBS News. Not because the story was flawed, but because it was finished. Reporters had done field work, witnesses had spoken, editors had completed the cut, legal had signed off, standards and ethics had approved it. Under normal circumstances, there was no reason to pull it. That is precisely why internal anger erupted. Many veteran journalists described the move as a red line, not because a story was delayed, but because a core journalistic principle had been broken. The credibility of 60 Minutes, built over decades, it was weighed against short-term political considerations. Public trust, once lost, cannot be restored by airing a report someday. So what was this report about that made it so politically dangerous? The investigation focused on a group of Venezuelan nationals. They were told they were being deported from the US, but instead of being sent home, they were flown directly to El Salvador. Their destination was not a processing center. It was Sacat, a notorious maximum security prison designed for alleged terrorists and gang members. These men were not randomly detained by El Salvador. They were transferred. There were records, flights, government-to-government coordination. In other words, this was not just a foreign human rights story. It was a story about U.S. responsibility, and that is what made it politically sensitive. According to the journalists involved, the report had been rigorously vetted at every level, that there was no dispute over accuracy, no legal complaints, no risk warnings. The decision to pull it did not stem from journalistic error. It came from a new demand, issued at the last moment. The report had to include a direct response from the Trump administration. CBS's editor-in-chief demanded on-camera responses from the White House, the Department of Homeland Security, and even specific figures such as Stephen Miller. The reporting team pushed back. Their reasoning was simple. The administration had been contacted repeatedly and had declined to respond. In investigative journalism, silence from those under scrutiny is not a reason to stop. It is a fact. If refusing to comment becomes grounds to block publication, any administration can kill unfavorable reporting simply by staying silent. That, the reporters argued, was no longer editorial judgment. It was a concession to power. This opposition was made explicit in an internal email sent by the lead reporter to colleagues. In it, she wrote that pulling the report was not a professional decision, but a politically motivated one. She warned that if CBS accepted this standard, 60 Minutes would no longer be an investigative program, but merely a record keeper for the state. The email quickly spread beyond CBS News and into the broader media world. It became evidence that tensions between journalism and power were entering a new phase. Subtler, but more dangerous. Because this was not a government ban. There was no written order, no formal decision, only pressure, fear, and safe choices made behind closed doors. The situation grew even more alarming in the broader context of American media regulation. During a congressional hearing, the chair of the FCC acknowledged that the agency is not as independent as the public believes, and did not rule out action against broadcasters deemed to be acting against the public interest. In practical terms, that forces major networks to calculate, is an investigative report worth risking regulatory stability? And when that calculation increasingly tilts toward no, investigative journalism begins to lose its core function. The consequence is not just one pulled report, it is a dangerous precedent, lest if the government does not respond, the story does not air. If power is displeased, the truth is delayed. And if economic interests are threatened, journalistic ethics become negotiable. In that system, the first to suffer are not media corporations, but victims. People without power, without voice, and without any path for their stories to be told outside independent journalism. The CBS incident is therefore not merely a crisis for one network. It is a sign that the relationship between political power and mainstream media is shifting in ways that harm the public. When journalism becomes afraid, the truth does not disappear overnight. It is delayed, blurred, pushed to the margins, and eventually, the public no longer knows what it is not being allowed to know. That is why this story matters. Not because it targets a president, but because it shows what happens when power is no longer meaningfully scrutinized. And in that vacuum, only two choices remain. Journalism either continues to fulfill its role, or accepts becoming part of the very power system it is supposed to oversee. From the outset, one point must be made clear to avoid any false equivalence. The report was not pulled because it was wrong, not because it lacked evidence, not because it was incomplete, guys. According to the journalists directly involved, it had passed every level of CBS's most stringent review process, multiple editorial rounds, extensive legal vetting, approval from standards and practices, a department known for its rigor, no legal warnings, no recommendations to delay, no journalistic objections. In American television journalism, especially at 60 Minutes, that means one thing: the report was ready to air, which is why the last-minute decision caused such internal shock, not because it was unusual, but because it violated every established process. Veteran journalists understood this clearly. Once a story clears all institutional safeguards at a network like CBS, only one thing can stop it: political power.